Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I am so glad you could join me for today's lesson. Today, in our series on big names in the Bible, we're taking a second look at the life of the prophet Elijah. And today we're going to take a look at the most famous episode from Elijah's life. Here's how it goes. Elijah was sent by God to give a message to King Ahab. Ahab was the king of the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes that had separated from the 2 tribes in the south. Ahab was regarded as an evil king because he led the people in the worship of idols. He led the people to worship things other than God. Well, Elijah went to Ahab and he said, it's time for us to settle this question. We need to figure out whose God is real. Is it the Lord God Almighty whom I serve, or is it these idols that your priests lead the people to serve? Well, Ahab said, okay. And they set up a meeting on Mount Carmel, and they gathered all of the people of Israel there. And on top of the mountain, here's what happened. Here was Elijah, and he built an altar. He had an animal that had been cut up for sacrifice placed on the altar. Over here was another altar that the priests of these idols had erected, and they too had an animal that they had cut up and had placed on the altar as a sacrifice. Now the idea was that Elijah and the priests would call down fire from heaven. And Elijah said, if your gods answer and there's fire from heaven and your sacrifice is burned and consumed, then we will know that your gods are the true gods. However, if my God is the one who can send fire from heaven and consume this sacrifice, well, then you'll know that the Lord is God. So Elijah said to the priests that were leading the people in idol worship, he said, you go first. And so these priests started dancing around the altar. They were praying, "Oh Baal, send fire from heaven, send fire from heaven." And they kept doing that, and they did it over and over and over again for hours, and nothing happened. And Elijah was sitting on the sideline, and he was kind of trash-talking these priests. He'd say, is your God asleep? Is he hard of hearing? Why doesn't he answer you? What's going on? Well, finally, these priests got exhausted, and they were really tired, and so Elijah said, hey, it's my turn. And so not only had Elijah built this altar, put this animal on top of it, he now took an additional step. He dug a big ditch all the way around the altar. And he had people come and pour lots and lots and lots of water on that altar so that the wood and the animal for sacrifice were completely soaked. So much so that there was water running around in that ditch. And then Elijah simply prayed and said, God, I'm doing what you ask. Send fire from heaven. And as the writer of Kings tells us, in that instant, fire fell from heaven and burned up the altar, burned up the sacrifice, and dissipated all of the water. And in that instance, Elijah won the contest with the prophets of Baal, and the people of Israel suddenly said, you know, we have been wrong. We've been following the wrong gods. And there in that moment, they said, we need to turn back to the one true God. Now, this is a wonderful story, got lots of fun stuff in it, but here are some important lessons that I think we can draw from this episode in Elijah's life. The first is that Elijah had a lot of courage. It takes a lot of bravery to go and march right up to the king and say to the king, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not doing what is right. to kind of feel what that would be like, all we have to do is imagine going to the White House or going to the Capitol building and seeing the president or some of our representatives and senators and simply walking up to them and saying, "You're doing the wrong thing." I imagine if we thought about doing that and we actually had the opportunity to do it, we'd probably all be afraid. Well, Elijah, I think, was afraid, but nonetheless, he mustered the courage and he went and confronted Ahab and said, "You're not being a good king. You're leading the people in the wrong direction." Elijah was brave in doing that. Secondly, Elijah had what we would call just a strong faith. Elijah put his whole trust in God. Now, it's one thing to say, "I'm going to call on God to consume my sacrifice." It's another thing as well to soak that sacrifice in water and then say, "God, hey, send fire from heaven and consume it." Elijah was willing to do that because he had enormous confidence in God. He trusted what God had told him. He leaned on that, and he acted as if everything God had said would happen would indeed happen. That's real faith. That is extraordinary faith. And Elijah had it in spades. The final lesson is this: Elijah didn't do this spectacular thing for himself. He wasn't out to enhance his reputation. He wasn't out to try to put on a show. No, he did what he did in order to serve God and to get the people back on the right track. What Elijah did wasn't just for himself. What Elijah did that day was to serve the other people, all the people of Israel. And so when it came to doing this hard thing and this right thing, Elijah wasn't doing it so he could have a spotlight on himself. He was doing it because it served the interests of his friends in Israel. And that in and of itself is a very, very good lesson. Well, that'll do it for today. I hope you're well. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. And in the meantime, please take care of yourself. Please take care of your families. And just know how much God cares about each and every one of you. Goodbye.